Good morning and welcome to the next panel at Hoosier Environmental Council's Greening the State House. I'm Tim Maloney with the council and I'll be moderating this panel. I wanted to start off with just a quick reminder about managing and navigating Hopin. You'll find that on the right side of your screen should be two chat columns, the event chat column and the stage chat column. Please put your comments and questions in the stage chat column. And then on the left-hand side menu is the menu for navigating the event overall from the reception area to the stage area where we are now, and to individual networking and the expo booths, as well as the session events which happen between the panels. So our panel today is about moving on from a polluting past with a focus on northern and southern Indiana, how the state can move forward from its polluting past, and also the essential role of quality of life in economic decisions and planning, which our first presenter will talk about in more detail. You can see our panelists listed there, and I'll introduce each of them in more detail before they speak. So if we could get ready for Dr. Hicks. Michael Hicks is the George and Francis Ball Distinguished Professor of Economics and the Director of the Center for Business and Economic Research at Ball State University. Previously served on the faculty of the Air Force Institute of Technology's Graduate School of Engineering and Management, and worked at research centers at Marshall University and University of Tennessee. He's authored 3 books and more than 50 scholarly papers, best known for his work on tax incentives and the impact of Walmart. Been published in the Rolling Stone, The Economist, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Washington Post. Also appeared on C-SPAN, MSNBC, NPR, and Fox Business News. He has doctoral and master's degrees in economics from University of Tennessee, a bachelor's in economics from Virginia Military, and is a veteran, having served in the Army as a Army Reserve infantryman in combat and peacekeeping operations in North Africa, Southwest Asia, Korea, and Japan. He's a really well-traveled around the world and now lives in Yorktown with his wife, Janet, and 3 overactive kids. Welcome, Dr. Hicks.
Tim, thank you. I feel very privileged to be with you today.
Okay.
What I'd like to
take it away.
I'll start on what I'd like to do today is to talk about economic development. And I'm going to talk about economic development in a way that I think is different than many of you have heard. And I'm going to focus on this talk on how do households value quality of life, and end with a description of those things that we think families are valuing based on this measurement issue. And so I'll just go through. So I have a lot of slides here that are dense with data, but just to set this up, we all know that places that are nicer do better at attracting people, and of course businesses as well. Whatever we call it, quality of life is what I'm calling it, but it also goes by quality of place. The process of doing it is placemaking, primacy of place, are all different taglines to describe nicer neighborhoods, towns, cities, communities. And many folks argue that high quality job growth is driving quality of place by attracting a stronger tax base or more affluent residents. That's sort of the Richard Flora discussion. And at the same time, decades of business attraction policies, these are tax incentives, low taxes, heavy focus on infrastructure, worker training, the sorts of things that animate the discussion of economic development in the Midwest, and certainly here in Indiana, are doing that. But at the same time, we have to just acknowledge that we're very heterogeneous people. Some of us really prefer extraordinarily rural places. Others, want to live in Manhattan. Some of us just hate the cold. Others like dislike a hot Florida summer. And so we're really struggling to figure out, what is it that would make our place attractive to people, because there's always that concern about, population loss or population growth, which is driving much of the public policy discussion, particularly in places that are struggling economically. So again, we know what people like in surveys. So there are a number of really fantastic surveys. The Knight Foundation, Pew Research has done big surveys of people. Individual researchers have asked them, what do you value? Is it schools? Is it, proximity to recreational activities? Is it proximity or access to natural resources that you can enjoy, a park, a national forest? And, we think we kind of know what people like in the communities where they've chosen to live, because that, to an economist, is their revelation of their preferences. So where people choose to move, we think as an economist, is the better way to measure what people like, because they're trading off the access to a job, the cost of living, and the amenities that they prefer in those areas. And so I'm just going to say the sort of survey or the hunches or the assumptions about what people like aren't all that valuable, because we're trading off all of these different things. And so we can say people don't like a big commute, or they don't like to live in a place that's cold, and yet a lot of people commute long distances, much of folks in America, and there are a lot of people living in cold places like Muncie. And so what we have done is what economists have done, and my colleagues Amanda Weinstein at University of Akron and my colleague Emily Warnell, a sociologist here with me at Ball State, we have extended the research on the measure of quality of life that is market-based. And so it's much like a stock price measures all that is good or bad about a known company. This quality of life measures all the hidden things about a community and puts them in context. And we do it in two ways. The first way should be pretty familiar to most of us. Certainly realtors will think that way. So, let's say we had two completely identical homes. They're a mid-century brick rancher, 1,600 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths on a quarter-acre lot. If you put one of these in a temperate community with nice rolling hills, good public schools nearby, and you put the other one in a place that was environmentally damaged, it had, a number of bad air days, and it was at the end of an airport runway, then you would know that the difference in prices of those two identical homes are capturing the amenities of one place and the disamenities of another. Now, unfortunately, we don't have, thousands of identical homes to sprinkle across the country for our study, but we do know characteristics of homes. And so we can create a statistically identical home in each U.S. county by controlling for their size, age, density, the type of construction, the year that they were built, the size of the lots. So we can predict the price of a home. And that model, by the way, explains 90-some% of the price variance of homes in the United States. But there's an unmeasured element, an error term that we economists, anybody who's a statistical modeler throws in. And that error term is either going to be high, so that the home has a higher than expected value, or low, it has a lower than expected value. So if the error term is positive, so that the price is more expensive than it should be given its characteristics, then it's reflecting something about that community that causes consumers to spend more money to be there. So we know people are willing to pay more money to live in a place they want to be. This is the way we measure that. If the price is low, if it's less than you would expect given the size and the quality of the home, then there's something about that community that is a disamenity. And so that gives us a measure of the relative cost of living, or really a measurement of the value people place on their choice to live there. And so that measure is a measure of their living the value of the place that they live. And that's half of the measure, and it's important in a post-COVID world because 1 in 5 folks are going to be able to live, or at least 1 in 5 hours of work are going to be done remotely around the country. So a lot of people are now going to just be thinking about where they live because they can then live there and work anywhere in this. But we also have to take into account jobs. And so let's do this same mental exercise for labor market. Suppose I'm a worker and I'm going to do it 2 ways. I'm a worker and I can choose between 2 jobs, one in a county that I really want to live, and the same job in a county that I don't want to live. Which one am I? How am I going to bid out that in my labor market? Well, if it's a nice place to live, a lot of people probably want to live there. I'm going to be willing to take a little bit lower wage to live in that place I really like. But if it's a crummy place that I don't like, it has characteristics that I don't value or I don't want to be around, then I'm going to demand a higher wage. So, we have identical jobs in lots of towns. We don't have identical workers. So we can create identical workers by controlling for age, gender, ethnicity. Occupation primarily matters. Education matters. And then the structure of the labor market. What's the unemployment rate? What's the long-term unemployment rate? What's the mix of jobs and occupations that we have? And in that case, we have a prediction of a wage that every worker is going to get in each, the average wage in that county. And that explains 85 to 90% of wages in each county in the United States. But if there's a little bit higher wage, well, that's a place that people have to receive a premium to move to. If it's a lower wage, they're taking less for it. So now we can combine these two together to tell us something about quality of life. So this measurement of taking the labor market decisions that households make for invisible causes. We don't know what they value. We could just see what they're doing with their voting with their feet. We don't know what they value in labor markets, and we don't know what they value in housing markets, but we know that it's always going to be that you're going to pay more for something you value, or which is either expressed through higher home prices or a giving up a wage premium to move someplace. And so that gives us a single point estimate of quality of life of every county in the United States, or 3,100 of the 3,144, because there's some where data just aren't available. And the model's not perfect. Really fast growing or really negative growing urban places may not be at equilibrium, but we're looking at multiple decades, so we think we can fix that. And in urban places, this isn't as good, simply because if I live in Hamilton County, the chance of me accessing a labor market somewhere else is pretty high. So the home market value works pretty well, but the job market's not as good. And so let's just take a look at what this looks like around the United States. The more brown, orange, rusty color are places that have lower market measured quality of life. And the blue places have a higher measure of quality of life. And there are interesting border effects here that we think reflect schools, and some, particularly in the West, some of these counties are, several Rhode Islands and Vermonts put together, so that looking at just a few places in that county is not very good. But you can definitely see border effects where schools are better on average in one state than another. And I think if you would drill down and look where we live, you can see that there's a great deal of variability. And again, you may prefer to live in one of these places. I find El Paso an interesting place to be, but it's not in the national numbers, doesn't appear as high quality of life. So now let's see, this is an interesting thing, but what does this tell us? And the big things we'd want to know: does it predict growth in population? And does it predict growth in wages? So we'll start first with, I'm just looking at micropolitan places. These are places that we have population growth in the last decade in the vertical axis, and we have quality of life on the horizontal axis. Then we see there's places that are growing pretty fast: Heber, Utah; Dickinson, North Dakota; Danville, Virginia is growing more slowly, although it has a high quality of life. So there are variations in this. Places that are really slow growing, like Logan County, West Virginia, or Pecos, Texas. This is a fracking place that went through the fracking process. And so we know there's a correlation here, and the value here is these are in log terms, so it's less than 1. So you go from a 0 to a 1 in your quality of life. You see about a 0.75% increase in your population growth. So not bad. The type of thing that if you made small adjustments over time, you can see fairly big changes in population. But what's interesting, that job growth is more than twice as sensitive, right? This is the same data, but instead of looking at population growth in the last decade, I'm looking at job growth. And so that value here goes from a 0.745 to a 2. So almost 3 times as strong an effect. And so what this tells us, and I'll show you more pictures in a minute, is frankly that businesses are moving to places that they believe people value and creating jobs there, and that workers are also moving to those places as well. So, and the other thing is that when these jobs are actually measured employment, that means that you're seeing population growth in those working age, primarily young adults. So that as an economic development strategy, this quality of life would sort of yield the things that all of your elected officials say they want, which are better jobs, and more people in your community. The same thing holds here. These are Midwestern metropolitan counties, a little bit bigger spread, but there's still, an impact there. An employment change, stronger effect in Midwestern counties. These are metropolitan statistical areas. And this is non-micro. These are rural counties. There's still a positive effect. The scales are different here. So there's some metropolitan counties that have grown enormously. If I take some of these outliers of counties that have doubled, and that we're really talking about places that have 4,000 people and they exploded because of a fracking operation. But if we take out some of the natural resource extraction counties, the rural places look like the micropolitan places as well. So then the next question we have, and this is what I really end on, is so what is it that people value? We see that our measure is a measure of interest. And I can tell you, when we did this study, we looked at outliers, and one of the outliers we thought would be a great place to live. It was Harrison, Arkansas. All the data around it looked really good, but it had a very low quality of life measure. We couldn't understand why that was happening. And so we started, again, looking through data, looking on the web, and what we found at the Wikipedia page on the first or second line was, this is the home of the Ku Klux Klan in the American South. And so our model captures the preferences of households to include something that sensitive. That was a huge outlier. But what we really want to do then is to try to figure out, I'm bouncing around to this slide. We have huge amount of data about places in the United States. And so what does high quality of life correlate with? Well, we put them in 3 buckets: natural amenities, public amenities, and private amenities. So natural amenities make sense. Places that are a bit warmer in January, a bit cooler in July, are places that people prefer. Hilliness, they kind of like. The forest coverage in federal land is mostly, we think, a statistical artifact for large federal land places that don't have a lot of population growth in them. So, Harrison or Perry County, which are covered by a big chunk of the Hoosier National Forest. And this is a national study, so it picks up a lot of counties out west. Public amenities, and by the way, these values here are all interpretable the same way, right? So school spending as a share of GDP is the strongest value. Violent crime rate is pretty strong. Number of physically unhealthy days, proximity to metro, and the share that work from home are all important things. And then private amenities, food stores, arts, culture, recreation, a couple of weird ones. Worship places, again, we think that's a statistical artifact because places that were developed before the advent of the automobile have lots of small churches, and this is just a count measure. And then eating and drinking places pick up a lot of fast food. But I want to turn to these things. School spending, we think, is a proxy for school quality. We don't think it's a perfect proxy, but we think that's what people are interpreting. The violent crime rate's low in most of the United States. The crime, at least, is concentrated in just a few places, but it tends to be, it's not a random event. We think this really reflects blight. And then physically unhealthy days, we think are an artifact of environmental damage, primarily air quality issues and water quality issues. And so we think that our measure tells us that the things that people value are the things that are often provided by local government and state government. And then just finally, we don't think this is a passing fad in economic development, but really a half century long behavioral adjustment in household location decisions. The market-based measure we have is good for researchers, but it's really good to tell those of you who live in places what are valued by people who are going to move here. And we hope you'll take this back to your elected officials and say, look, the quality of life is what's driving people to our community. So that's what we really need to focus on. And that's all I have, Tim. Thank you.
And you'll be around for question and answers. So our next panelist is Natalie Johnson, the Executive Director of Save the Dunes Council. And Natalie's been working on water quality efforts and environmental community outreach for over 16 years. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education with a biology emphasis from the University of Missouri at St. Louis. Also has a Master of Science in Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She's an active board member of the Gary Rotary Club, an advisor to the Citizens Advisory for the Remediation of the Environment, governing member of Healing Our Waters Coalition, with many other activities. And she enjoys hiking, kayaking, and volunteering for animal rescue groups in her region. So welcome, Natalie.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here today. And want to welcome you to the Northwest quadrant of Indiana, Northwest Indiana. That's where we're headed today. Because when we talk about quality of life and how the environment plays into this, what better of a snapshot than to look at Northwest Indiana. So I'm going to take you to the Lake Michigan watershed up north and kind of look at the challenges that we've had in the past and the challenges that we have today. And so Emily's going to be helping me out with advancing my slides. So you'll hear me go, next, please. And I appreciate her assistance. So welcome, like I said, welcome to Northwest Indiana. What do we have? Well, my goodness, we have a landscape that is unparalleled to no others. I mean, truly, 15,000 acres belong to a national park, the Indiana Dunes National Park. And even outside of that, we have over 42,000 of other acres of other protected lands managed across 3 counties. In the area, it's the birthplace of ecology. It's the 5th most biodiverse park in the system. You have your prairies, you have your wetlands, of course you have the dunes. Just this beautiful landscape that sits on approximately 45 acres of Lake Michigan shoreline. It is a destination that over 3 million people are coming to each year. And this was even before the name change to a national park, which I will get to. But people are coming here. People want to go and live, work, and play in Northwest Indiana. And it is not just because of its natural features. If we go to the next slide, you can see we also have something that's very difficult to overlook in our region, because nestled among all of these great natural places is, of course, a heavy concentration of industry. Now, that means good jobs for many people. And this is industry that has been dating back for years and years and years. We have the U.S. Steel Gary Works and Burns Harbor plants, ArcelorMittal, now known as Cleveland Cliffs, and the Northern Indiana Public Service Company. All of these industries that are utilizing Lake Michigan in order to provide these good jobs and produce great products in the region. And really an interesting landscape, because you have these industries nestled right in that beautiful environment that I showed a picture of earlier. We have one of the most fragmented parks, one of the most urbanized parks in the entire system. So advancing on, where to save the dunes, my organization fall into this? Well, we protect and advocate for those natural areas for the betterment of the environment and the people who live, work, and recreate in Northwest Indiana. And really, what does that mean? Well, it means taking a very close look at that built environment and the natural environment and balancing those two things. We know that these are amenities to the people of Northwest Indiana, and it's not to say that we can't have both. However, we have to be thinking about how to use them wisely today and well into the future. Next, please. And that's about why we were founded. I mean, actually, we probably weren't thinking about that balancing act back in 1952 when we were founded. But truly, since the early 1900s, the movement of protecting the dunes has been around because we were seeing the dunes disappear at a very, very rapid pace, which we can see on our next slide. These photos, dating again all the way back early 1900s and all the way through, was just really an instance where Chicago was saying that they would not want industry on their shoreline, and Indiana said, well, we're welcoming it with open arms. And yet there wasn't a whole lot of thought of what that meant, taking down these dunes, taking out these wetlands, these forests, what that meant to the quality of life to people who would be wanting to live and stay in Northwest Indiana. Next, please. Huge success came in 1966. I mean, there was a lot of challenging questions of whether or not you chose hills or mills. But in 1966, that's when a lot of the environmental activists came together and they were able to establish the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, which on our next slide, I mentioned a name change. It was in 2019 that we switched the name from the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore to a national park. And let me tell you, that's when the cat was out of the bag. After years and years of working to protect this beautiful place, having it protected under the Department of Interior as a national lakeshore, no new money came with a national park name, but notoriety did. And when we changed it from a lakeshore to a park, that's when we were more on the map than ever for people wanting to come and tour this beautiful place to live here. And the next slide, please. I just can't emphasize those beautiful assets, the wonderful things that we have in Northwest Indiana because of our wonderful national park. And though legacy pollution is something that, of course, we're dealing with and have dealt with just because there was a lot of rapid growth from the industry section before we were really thinking about the preservation and how that balanced out, we still managed to find this beautiful place that now attract many different families and individuals to come live, work, and play in Northwest Indiana. But then coming to the present day, you think about, here's this attractive place that I want to live. I want to live in or near Indiana Dunes National Park. Going to the next slide. Can you imagine? These are the kind of things that you are seeing coming out of the headlines. Of course, when you have the two different, the built environment and the environment, the natural environment, coexisting together, you're going to have challenges. And we have seen our share of challenges. In April 2017, right next to Lake Michigan, we had a discharge of hexavalent chromium that happened over a couple of days from the U.S. Steel facility at Burns Harbor. That while people were enjoying the shoreline right there, this waterway runs right through our national park. Hexavalent chromium, which is something that people know because their minds go to Aaron Brockovich if they've ever read any of the books or if they've seen the movie. And that was extremely alarming to know that this was something that was in our waterway, and not just a little. The facility was permitted to discharge 0.51 pounds of hexavalent chromium per day and ended up emitting over 902 pounds of this over a couple of days. And on top of this, total communication failure. As far as being able to get the word out that this was happening, there was certainly a breakdown in communication. Indiana American Water wasn't notified as quickly as they could have. we actually were one of the ones who told the national park. And yes, that's wonderful as an organization that we could help notify and bring this to light. The fact that there wasn't a streamlined, this is what's happening, this is how this issue is being addressed, really created a lot of discomfort and a lot of unknown in our communities. But it's not just this issue. If we move forward, you have 2019, another incident happening. ArcelorMittal, now known as Cleveland Cliffs, a major malfunction that happened over nearly a week, where cyanide and ammonia was released into the waterway that directly connects with Lake Michigan. So again, within our national park, this caused 3,000 fish to die. And this is in August. It was still a time where you had your boaters out there, you had people swimming, you had surfers, people with, as this article says, with their grandkids there. There were people swimming and enjoying and recreating the waters while this was happening, completely unbeknownst to the public. We move forward to even more recently, and we're talking just really September is when this happened. So very recently, U.S. Steel, right after agreeing to settle for everything that happened in the 2017 spill, we now had a major release of iron that was very visible and we could see going out into Lake Michigan. And in the confusion and the scare of all of that, 2 weeks later, an oil spill that came from U.S. Steel once again. So, next slide, please. When you're trying to advertise Northwest Indiana as a destination for you and your family, it has the jobs, it has these wonderful amenities, these natural places. This is a wonderful place to bring your kids, to have a family, to live, to thrive, and also a place where you want to visit, to come to Northwest Indiana. When these are in your headlines, and this is the story that is being painted, it's not one that certainly gives you a whole lot of confidence living in Northwest Indiana. And these are just recent articles. The recent article as far as Indiana being the leader in the nation in toxic chemical releases. And even dating back 2017, Indiana producing the 6th most toxic chemicals in the U.S. Part of this is just because we have such a high concentration of industry, but keep in mind, we also then have these industries right next to all these places where people want to live and recreate. So how does this make this a place where people want to live? And next slide, please. Especially this, the iron, the fish kills. In that top right corner, that isn't even necessarily a photo of a spill. That's just the discharge of a lot of the sediment in the waterway going out into Lake Michigan through the Burns waterway. But seeing that visually, folks are scared. Folks in Northwest Indiana are just unnerved. The bottom corner, maybe there isn't a great number, maybe some of that is more steam or things, in the environment, but still these visuals, that's not really giving people the confidence that their environment's being protected and they're safeguarded against this heavy concentration of industry, which, while important, and again, great jobs, still needs to be managed in a way that coexists, where people feel confident that they are being safeguarded and able to use these wonderful natural amenities without risk or harm to their families. So how do we move forward? That's the next slide there. I know we're going to be discussing that a little bit today from our Q&As, but essentially at Save the Dunes, we've come up with a few action items that we like to put to the forefront, and that's on our next slide. And that is collectively say enough is enough. It really starts with all of us, and that's why we're rallying today to talk about the power of our collective voice. We can't rely on our neighbors to always be the one telling the message. It takes all of us to be able to say that this is important to us, and in Northwest Indiana in particular, and across the state of Indiana. We need to make sure that this built environment and the natural environment are working together. We're thinking about this for the future so as to have a nice quality of life where people can both live and work and not be so concerned about their children's future. So we have messages that we send down to the rest of the state. And often in Northwest Indiana, we have challenges because we worry, that the rest of the state sometimes fails to remember that we are a Great Lakes state. So often we're trying to remind, hey, we're a Great Lakes state and we have a great concentration of industry. So we really need your support, heightening that scrutiny, heightening that enforcement against these chronic polluters. And that includes much higher fines. We're asking the state to strengthen our pollution control and to look at the communication requirements, because this is all about people need to be in the know. They need to be aware when these issues are not only happening, but also how they are being addressed. And then those permits, such as the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, where the public does have the ability to weigh in on how can the communities get involved in those renewals and know exactly what's in those permits. Now, the next bullet, strengthen support for the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. That is our first line of defense. And I was just talking to some of my colleagues right before this. We heard on Wednesday that our commissioner, Bruno Piggott from IDEM, is going to be leaving. He is going to be leaving to work for the Environmental Protection Agency, which we wish him all the best. It's really quite wonderful that we're seeing somebody from Indiana selected to move on and work at the federal level. But now then more than ever, how do we retrain and attract that top quality staff? How are we going to see our next commissioner is someone who is committed to looking at these issues and controlling and reducing industrial pollution entering our waterways? And then also looking at IDEM's efficacy of the permitting process. We're going to need another champion in that role. And that's something collectively today, all of us need to be thinking about. How are we going to talk to the rest of the state that this is important to us and that we need a strong leader in IDEM to help be that first line of defense? I move to that next slide just to emphasize that the importance of all of this is because we want our next generation to not leave any place that we're living in. We don't want them to leave Northwest Indiana. We want our children and our children's children to feel as though they can live and work and play in Northwest Indiana, that there is the natural amenities that they can enjoy, but they are well balanced by a regulated industry, an industry that provides jobs, but ones that's held accountable in the face of quite frankly, disaster, I think is the word to put it. So the last slide, I just throw up my contact information in case anyone wants to discuss that further. But truly, that's the snapshot of what's going on in Northwest Indiana. It's past, certainly dictated a future of what we have now. And now it's that balancing act, but we can't just pause. It's something that we will continue to navigate for years and years, finding that harmony between industry, the built environment, and our natural environment. And that is what I have as far as my remarks at this time.
Well, thank you very much, Natalie. You certainly covered a lot of territory in a short amount of time, so we appreciate that. And of course, Natalie will be around for the panel discussion at the end. Our next panelist is Mary Hess, who from Dale, Indiana, who is a leader in the group Southwestern Indiana Citizens for Quality of Life. She was born in Tell City on the Ohio River and has degrees in recreation and physical education from Oakland City College in Oakland City, Indiana. She's served as recreation director in her town of Dale, Indiana for 6 years before joining the Postal Service and retiring from the Postal Service in 2013. She really enjoys the natural beauty of southern Indiana by hiking and kayaking the many lakes down there. And Mary, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel this morning. I would like to give a short overview of our grassroots efforts to stop a coated diesel refinery in our town and the slides you're going to see are the pictures of the people who are making the difference here. I represent a large group of citizens in southwestern Indiana opposing a coal-to-diesel refinery proposed by Riverview Energy. The refinery, if built, will be inside the town limits of Dale, Indiana. As a group, we believe that we should promote engagement with local governments to ensure everyone has input to decisions that affect us. This was a problem in the very beginning when the town council welcomed Riverview without community input. Small communities like Dale become the victim when community leaders give in to a large polluting industry with the promise of jobs and tax revenues at the expense of our health. When word leaked out, those same community leaders ignored our concerns, so it was time to organize. After a few meetings, we have become a large group of dedicated local citizens. We were fortunate to have guidance and support from John Blair and Valley Watch to help us organize. And like many of the organizations here today, we pulled in support from environmental groups throughout the state. Fighting anything related to coal in southern Indiana is a challenge because everybody is related to or knows someone who has made their living from coal. And then there is the NIMBY accusation, not in my backyard. But we always made it clear that we don't want this refinery anywhere. We also heard it was a done deal and there was nothing we could do about it. Despite the challenges, we moved forward with our opposition. Our group leaders represented a wide cross-section of the community: doctors, teachers, business people, and engineers. We had 3 well-attended community forums to educate the community on the refinery, its process, and toxic pollutants it would be emitting. Officers traveled to Indianapolis and Washington, D.C. to share our concerns with our representatives. We wrote many letters to the editor and were well supported by some newspapers and environmental publications. We attended festivals with information tables, and we made every effort to attend community council meetings and ask questions. In June of 2019, Riverview received their air quality permit from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. IDEM held a hearing for comments on the permit. 237 people wrote comments opposing the permit, and 10 people wrote comments supporting the permit. This didn't stop IDEM from issuing the permit, besides being over 13 times their own cancer risk. We knew we had to change course and challenge the permit. John Blair of Valley Watch was able to get us connected to Earth Justice. Earth Justice took on our case to challenge Riverview's permit. The Office of Environmental Adjudication ruled against our challenge, and we have since appealed that decision. We are currently awaiting the ruling on our appeal from Marion County Superior Court. In October of this year, on our behalf, Earth Justice filed with the EPA a petition for reconsideration of Riverview's permit. The EPA has recently contacted us, and they are currently reviewing the permit. We have spent countless hours over the last years doing all we can to stop this refinery, and at this time, no construction has begun. We have placed 4 billboards in our area telling us we can do better. And we can if our community leaders would be more open to the decisions that affect us all. Bringing a coal-to-diesel refinery to our area would be detrimental to our quality of life. The refinery will emit deadly hydrogen sulfide and benzene, along with other hazardous air pollutants, within close proximity to schools and nursing homes. It will also emit 2 million tons of greenhouse gases annually. These emissions will not just harm our area, but the state and our world. Our health is at stake, and the refinery site will be a blight on our landscape. I can't imagine why anyone, and especially families, would want to live with a refinery inside their town limits. Big industry has not been a benefit to our area, Instead of bringing promised economic growth, we get pollution and decreased population. Because of our rural area, our state officials take us for granted, out of sight, out of mind. But we continue to make our voices heard so they know our quality of life is important to us. This is some of the most beautiful land in Indiana, and by spoiling it with polluting industry, we are destroying its value. We have state parks, the Hoosier National Forest, and 5 miles from the proposed refinery site is one of the premier amusement parks in our country, Holiday World. Instead of threatening our quality of life and spoiling our rural land with refineries, we need to preserve our quality of life. This is a great place to live and raise a family. We would hope our community leaders would include and engage citizens who have an investment in our future. That future includes a community that is free from pollution and respects the natural beauty that is Southwestern Indiana. I would like to mention that this group was fortunate enough to receive a grant from the AEP Mitigation Fund, a fund of Central Indiana Community Foundation. And with that grant, we have set up a air monitor network with IQ Air. It's under OVSA on IQ Air's website. And with that, we're hoping that people will check that so they know when the air is physically unhealthy to be outside. And we also, with that grant, we have water kits for homes. And I will be putting my email address up in the chat. So if anybody is wanting to have their home water tested, and that test actually goes to an EPA certified lab. But we're doing that to be more proactive, and we're wanting our county, state, and local officials to just let us be part of their conversation. And I think in the long run, that would help us all. And that's really all I have until the question and answer part.
Well, thank you very much, Mary, for being part of the panel and the very informative presentation. So stick around, and you'll be back for the panel Q&A. I will be wrapping up the presentations here to talk about another project that with potential adverse impact for Southern Indiana. Emily, the slides, please. Thank you. Back to the first one there. Thanks. This is about saving a unique Indiana landscape, and the threat to this landscape is the so-called Mid-States Corridor Highway, which we think is a wrong turn for Southern Indiana. I'll talk very briefly about what the project entails, its expected impacts, the status of planning the project, and the next steps from our coalition. Next, please. Here's a map of the possible routes of the Mid-States Corridor, which would be a 4-lane expressway or Super 2 highway that would follow existing US 231 north from the Ohio River around Jasper and Huntingburg, and then branch off either to the northwest or the northeast or due north, as you see in these route alternatives, to hook up with the new I-69 highway, either around Washington, Indiana, there at the Crane Naval Center, or to State Road 37 up to Bloomington and hit 69 there. Next, please. What's at risk? Just very quickly, up to 2,000 acres of forest land, 800 acres of floodplain, 60 acres of wetlands, 20 miles of stream corridors disturbed or destroyed, including 500 acres of karst features, up to 1,500 acres of farmland paved, and as many as 255 homes and 51 businesses lost. This is a very robust outdoor recreation area with public forest lands in the Hoosier National Forest, Martin State Forest, the East Fork White River, a popular water destination, hiking, biking, and horse trails throughout the area, and the caves that I'll talk about a little bit more, all of which contribute to Indiana's $16 billion a year outdoor recreation economy. Next slide, please. Here's a table that details these impacts in more detail, and don't worry about memorizing this. This is available in a fact sheet on our webpage. We'll have the link later, but you'll note from the top lines that the new terrain portion of this project could include anywhere from 34 to 62 miles of new terrain construction. Next, please. So let's take a look at the really wonderful landscape potentially affected by this project in south central Indiana. This is the Williams Covered Bridge over the East Fork White River. Next, please. Mentioned the Hoosier National Forest earlier. The proposed routes M and O would run through the purchase area of the Hoosier National Forest and perhaps even across Hoosier National Forest properties. This area is home to endangered species like the loggerhead shrike, which you see on the left. Next, please. And also because of the open lands and meadows and grasslands in this area, it's also habitat for the state endangered barn owl. And the forests of this area in Martin State Forest and Hoosier National Forest are home to the state endangered cerulean warbler, which likes deep forest habitats. Next, please. Now to the centerpiece of this area is the globally unique Lost River Karst area. Karst refers to a topographical area underlain by limestone geology where the forces of water have worked on the bedrock for thousands and thousands of years to create caverns and openings throughout it, openings that become caves, sinkholes where surface water sinks into the earth, rises where and springs where the water comes out of the earth, and then the underground channel of the Lost River, which is the namesake of this really unique geological area. This area contains 3 national natural landmarks, areas with as much as 1,000 sinkholes per square mile, and the second longest cave system in Indiana. Next, please. And one of the researchers who has studied this area said this about the Lost River area and Indiana's Karst region. Very colorful description about the pit-marked lands of southern Indiana where placid streams disappear and riotous storm waters are swallowed up and disgorged from mysterious subterranean roots constitute a singular geomorphic area of unusual lore and challenging inquiry. And Mr. Malott talks about the many studies and inquiries of this area, even as of 1944, and that study has continued to this day. And it's sometimes hard to believe that an area that's so unique and valuable has received so little attention over the years in protecting the features of this area. Next, please. One of those notable features, a national natural landmark, is Wesley Chapel Gulf, a sinkhole that's 1,000 feet in length and has a cave entrance at one end of the sinkhole. Next, please. The Orangeville Rise, another national natural landmark and state-dedicated nature preserve managed by the Indiana Karst Conservancy. This is one of the areas where water rises out of the earth. The true rise of the Lost River is a little bit away, apart from the Orangeville Rise, but it's a really unique natural feature. Next, please. And in this cave system and underground waters of this area is the Hoosier cavefish, which was recently deemed a separate and distinct species from the blind cavefish, which is also found farther south and has now been recognized as a distinct Hoosier cavefish, and it is endangered due to the threats to karst resources in southern Indiana. Next, please. So what is the community and statewide response to the Mid-States Corridor? Well, there's been a very active group of local residents in Du Bois County and Orange County, principally under the umbrella of Stop the Mid-States Corridor. And then they've been joined by an alliance of state-level groups besides our group, the Indiana Forest Alliance, Sierra Club, Hoosier Chapter, Indiana Karst Conservancy, the Environmental Law and Policy Center of Chicago, and Orangeville Rise, which is kind of the umbrella for the residents of Orange County concerned about the Mid-States Corridor. Next, please. The next steps for our coalition are to expand and broaden support both throughout Indiana and through other sectors in the affected region, coordinating with our local allies, technical and policy input to the Indiana Department of Transportation and their highway planners and their consultants who are doing the study of this project. We have already drafted a very detailed technical comment letter to INDOT, 14 pages of comments with 16 organizations, 2 churches, and 56 small businesses signing on to those comments, as well as a companion letter to Governor Holcomb expressing our concerns, also with multiple signers. And then we're expecting to plan some town halls as the planning process proceeds here. Next slide, please. And just to tell you before we get into this information, the project is going through a formal National Environmental Policy Act planning process. Preliminary analysis has been completed and a draft environmental impact statement is in preparation, which is expected to come out early next year, which will trigger another formal public comment period before any final decision might be made later in 2022 or beyond. But the better path forward that our groups are putting forth is one that's more focused on quality of life and the elements of community and economic development that our earlier panelists have talked about. Particularly for road infrastructure, the state's focus should be on fixing and improving the roads we already have and making sure that they're safe and efficient transportation corridors. But we need to see much greater investment in other essential infrastructure, broadband service, making sure that our drinking water supplies are safe and accessible, that safe drinking water is available to everybody, improvements in rural health care, in rural schools, expansion of parks, trails, and outdoor access, which overall would be to expand the outdoor recreation economy and heritage tourism, 2 elements that could really that this area of Indiana could really capitalize on, and they really have not done that. And again, as we've been talking about for this whole panel, improve quality of life as a key metric for progress. And I did want to add that if you look at how these affected counties along the corridor of the Mid-States project, you'll see that some of these counties are lagging behind in broadband access. They're losing population. They don't have good access to outdoor places. So just building more roads is not the answer for a better future for these communities. If we could take the next slide, Emily. Thanks. So wrapping up here with Take Action, it's important to keep input coming into the state of Indiana and the highway planners and local officials throughout the whole process. And so we're encouraging people to express your concerns and views to Governor Holcomb. Here's his email address. Also, find your state legislators at this website and please communicate with them as well. And then the shortcut to our dedicated web page about the Mid-States Corridor with all of this information available, our fact sheet with the table I presented earlier, and our comment letter and contact information are all available at this link, nomidstates.org. Also check out Stop the Mid-States Corridor on Facebook and the websites of our partners as well for more information about this project. And one last thing I just mentioned, this is a proposed up to $1.5 billion highway project that is just minutes away from the $3.5 billion new Interstate 69 that is connecting Indianapolis to Evansville. So we're going to move now into bring our whole panel back and get into questions and answers and comments. Welcome again, Mike and Natalie and Mary. I see we've had a lot of comments coming in the comment page, so I'll just start launching into those and get back to the folks who started out. I know one of our colleagues asked Michael about how race and ethnicity is factored into your quality of life calculations and job growth modeling.
All right. So great question, Paula. We looked at we took our, remember, market-based measures of quality of life. Then we wanted to see what characteristics people cared about. I showed you the top 15 in those three buckets. Race mix and demographics were not strongly correlated with these market-based preferences, but there are some hints that there's some issues there. Intergenerational mobility and income inequality were modestly correlated with quality of life. So less income inequality and better intergenerational mobility were two of the factors that did matter, but they weren't particularly strong in this, and there's not easy direct policy levers for local governments to pull in those areas.
Okay, thanks. One comment just mentioned about how property values have really skyrocketed along the Monon Trail in Marion and Hamilton County. I don't know if Mike, you'd have any observations there. I just wanted to relay that comment.
Right. Well, I mean, that's how markets work. If there are places that people want to live, if there are assets that people want to be around, prices go up. The average price of a home in the United States is a bit over $215,000 a year. Right now, the average price for a home for sale is like $375,000. So, here in Indiana, we're blessed with an awful lot of affordable housing. So when you see something on the Monon Trail or and these trails are not just there throughout Delaware County and elsewhere, people like to live by, those increased property values induce new development because people want to live around those sorts of things. It's a common fact.
Okay, thanks. Next question here, and really open this to all panelists. How do we balance quality of life, things like preserving natural resources, including ag land, with revitalizing rural unincorporated residential districts and economic development in rural areas, not just the incorporated cities and towns in rural counties?
I could give it a shot. But the research says that even in rural places, people care about quality of life, right? That things like good schools matter, the absence of blight, which happens in rural small towns. And it's sort of less of an issue in farming community. There are vacant housing, but they don't sort of introduce the negative effects that they do in more urban places. But the fundamentals are largely the same. And in terms of economic development, economic growth, we are lucky to live in Indiana. It's a very compact place. You can live in rural Indiana. And 85% of our population has access to urban labor markets, but increasingly, because of COVID and the technologies that we're now all very facile with, we're going to see people being able to choose places to live that are not directly connected to those daily commutes. So it's an opportunity for more people returning to more rural or small town Indiana.
Mary, Natalie, anything else you want to add there?
I was going to say, I come at things from such an urban perspective that I think I'll sit this one out. But certainly, quality of life is much deserved in the rural just as much as the urban.
I will second the rural, because we all need some part of our life where we need to get away. And rural areas like ours that have such great parks and such great natural beauty need to be preserved. And I get the economic side, but there's also places where people need to live and enjoy life. And even with new housing development, it would help in our county.
Okay. Well, here's a comment about Northwest Indiana, and somebody saying they're pleased that the Northwest Indiana completed the state's first regional greenhouse gas inventory, and starting to talk about a region-wide climate action plan as well. So, congratulate Save the Dunes for its work. Anything you want to add there, Natalie?
Just that's one thing. It's easy to overlook the things that we can celebrate. There are good things happening. But what it has taken to get there is constant people. And I think that was probably Kathy Sipple, who I know is one of our great allies, who has been doing a lot of work out there. And she is a great example of someone who just continues. You have to be that squeaky wheel and continue to elevate these desires constantly and put them at the forefront. So it's something worth celebrating. But it took a lot of time. And it's something that for any of these issues, we have to take the time and just continue to push that these are important to us.
Thanks, Natalie. Let's see, I had another one here. Comment for you, Mike. And the commenter says, great info. As auto cities like Anderson, Muncie, Kokomo, Newcastle, etc., work to reinvent themselves, what factors can potentially contribute to their resurgence?
Right, that's a great question. One I think a lot about, since I live in one of them and have been spent a lot of time trying to think about these urban areas that are really surprisingly rural. I mean, the amount of corn in Delaware County is significant, and so the factors that I talked about before really matter. If you wish to grow new jobs and people, you have to have things that they value to relocate there. So the first one for most mobile families are going to be schools. Most mobility involves relocating to a place you want to live as you're expanding your family. That's been a persistent problem in each of the four communities you just mentioned. It's good to take a field trip and look at places like Muncie and Kokomo. Kokomo has done a great job of doing very, thoughtful infill so that they sustain communities. But there's really two problems. The places that were developed after the interstate still have lots of homes, or after the car was invented, have lots of homes that people would still wish to live in. Those that were built prior to the automobile tend to have homes that are very small and a big excess housing stock. And I just want to remind people, when you talk about housing stock, Indiana has about 300,000 excess homes. These are vacant homes that are, some of them are blighted. They're just sitting around, and they're places that people don't want to live. So our housing problem in Indiana is mostly surplus housing, not a shortage. And so places that shrink thoughtfully, as Youngstown or Detroit have done, have a better prospect of attracting people and economic activity than places that are ignoring that important feature of their community.
Thanks for that. And I know when we were talking last couple of days, you singled out Kokomo as a kind of a good example of a community that's trying to successfully grapple with all these concerns about resurgence after, the auto industry there took such a hit. So.
Right, and I'd just add, just important to remember, we're going to have more manufacturing production. In fact, we're probably at peak manufacturing production in Indiana history this quarter. We peaked employment in 1973, and so we're going to have a lot of manufacturing. We're going to have logistics, but it's not going to employ more people than we have employed now. We're back on trend of long-term decline in those areas because of automation and productivity growth. And so, when you think about jobs, you got to think about jobs that are around people, not factories and those sorts of things. And that's a challenge for many Hoosier economic development folks and legislators who, when they think jobs, they discount, the recreation jobs, the jobs in education and those other areas, and they really focus on big industry, and that's all in the rearview mirror for Indiana.
Okay, thanks. Several compliments to the presenters, to all of you, and a comment about appreciation for Mary, the work of your group, from someone who has family living and working in that area. And then next question is for you, Mary. What critiques regarding the coal to diesel refinery plant do you think has had the most traction with the Republican local elected officials in the area, even if they're not officially opposed?
It's hard to find those that are opposed to it. The party is well involved with coal, so that's part of the issue. We're just having a lot of trouble on that side. And we are a very diverse group of people. And it's not just because of a certain party they're a part of, but we are heavily invested in coal here. But, we need to preserve what's above the ground instead of raping what's below the ground. And we need to move on to renewables. And we just need a better air quality in this part of the state. And I think there's so much emphasis on money. And I think that's part of the issue right now with anybody that's wanting to bring jobs. But like I said, we have a great, jobs in this area. We have surrounding counties that hold many manufacturing jobs. And honestly, I think that's part of the issue. The jobs issue is what is moving the Republicans that we talk to. We are having a little trouble with Representative Bartels right now because he's trying to push the effort of getting water from the Ohio through Santa Claus to this site. And we would appreciate anybody contacting him that is opposed to this and giving their feelings on it to him. And you could find his contact information on his website. And he is District 74. But it's hard in that area. It really is.
Well, to that point, Mary, another question is, what can people around Indiana who don't necessarily live right there in Spencer County, what can they do to support what your group is doing?
We'd like to see them contact Governor Holcomb and, like I said, Representative Bartels and State Senator Mark Messmer. He's just up the road from us, so he's right in the midst of this. So anybody could contact those and let them know how they feel about this being in our state and what it's going to do to climate change would be a great help. You can go to our website, and it's noc2d.com. The no coal to diesel is what that stands for. And we also have a Facebook page, Southwestern Indiana Citizens for Quality of Life. And you could also contact me at hessmary@att.com, and I'll be glad to give you some information. We meet every first Tuesday of the month at the Dale Lincoln Heritage Public Library. We'd love to see people come there, and that's where we do our planning and how we move about with our opposition. So everybody's welcome, and if you have an idea, you know, drop us a message on Facebook and we'll get back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. Next question, Mike, for you. As you know, 140,000 Hoosiers are employed in Indiana recreation, and it generates over $1 billion in tax revenue. Why do you suppose that this very important economic sector isn't given more weight by state lawmakers when they are considering policy that could adversely impact our natural resources?
Yeah, I mean, great question, Jesse. It's a simple organizing and concentration of benefits issue. There are fewer than 2,000 coal mining jobs in Indiana. There are more professional dog walkers in Indiana than there are coal miners. And so if you're worried about coal having an outside voice, it's an organizing principle. They're very good at it. I mean, and you know, we have coal production in Indiana. It's trivial compared to most of the rest of the country. They don't like to hear that. I worked in West Virginia and East Tennessee. I'm sorry, they're just, you know, it's 2,000 jobs. And so when you're doing things that affect the employment growth, is all in service sector activities, things that support quality of life in healthcare, recreation, and that sort of thing. And that's where it's going to be in the future. And so I think it's a statement from y'all. I go back to economics because it's not just a red or blue, D or red or R thing. It is all about, you know, employment and economic opportunity are part of everything that's being thought about in these issues. And I actually think that the corridor, the Biden plan, I saw one of the questions, I'll jump ahead and hit on it. The economic analysis is now required, an enhanced economic analysis and evaluation programming for almost everything in the both the Recovery Act and follow-on activity. That's going to put this project at greater risk, is just the economic viability of the benefit to cost ratio.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. I'm not sure I'd seen that. And is this in the new infrastructure bill?
Yeah, I haven't read it in the bill, but the Biden administration is every piece of legislation now has specific evaluative components to it. So universities are getting bombarded with research requests and like 30 years of research in just a few weeks. And so I think the standards of benefit cost are what is the challenge to this project, because we just don't have the volume of demand for that activity, because as you say, it's adjacent to or proximal to other interstate activities that are being expanded right now. So that's I'm not discounting the environmental effect. I'm just saying, as an economist who's worked in a transportation research center, this one has problems on the economic side.
Okay, thanks. And on the topic of the mid-states, our ally Mark Nowotarski posts some resources for folks there, their web site address and Facebook page. So please take a look at that. Doreen Carey asks about whether an EIS, an environmental impact statement under NEPA, is only triggered for projects funded directly by the federal government, and then someone answers it's can also be triggered for federal permits, and we would confirm that response, that federal funding or other federal decisions can trigger an environmental impact statement. And since most large highway projects have federal funding, the NEPA process is always going to apply. So. Let's see. Let's see if we could get another one about Northwest Indiana. And a question about the Amish in southern Indiana. Are impacts to them and their homesteads being considered by state officials? Carl, I think under the cultural and historical resource review that the presence of Amish homesteads is considered, although not always that favorably, as we saw with Interstate 69.
Tim, I do see a couple questions about Northwest Indiana that I can kind of read.
Okay, sure, jump in there.
And address here. Okay, so there's a couple things here. First, I see a question as far as small court settlements of $600,000 are extremely small to steel industries, which make millions in profits annually. How could an organization like Save the Dunes join together with HEC and other organizations to set fines and lawsuit settlements in line with damage to quality of life they're causing on a regular basis? And that's a great question, because certainly there are organizations like our own, HEC, the same, and I know there's other organizations represented here, that yes, we do use lawsuits as one of a slate of tools in order to hold certain industries accountable. But let's back up real quick, because $600,000, that isn't a lot. That is such a slap on the wrist if we're talking about accountability. And it was once said, I think it was even the previous commissioner of Indiana Department of Environmental Management would always publicly state that their role was simply to bring industry into compliance. There was never any mention of accountability. So even when we talk about like lawsuits as being something that we can utilize, when you have an agency and a governor that's kind of set the stage of, oh, well, we're just bringing them into compliance, that accountability piece is missing. And so when you're trying to go and you're trying to do a lawsuit, is it really taken as seriously as it could by the entire state? No. We need to raise the issue that accountability is just as important, if not more important, when it comes to bringing an industry, any kind of manufacturer, into compliance. That's what's going to give some of those lawsuits more teeth. And what's also going to give those lawsuits more teeth is really just everyone being the eyes and ears, being the watchdogs ourselves, because there are many times that there are multiple violations going on. We are told by IDEM that they're put up there publicly on their virtual filing cabinet, but it's very easy to overlook and miss these patterns of just continued over and over violations. And that's why I saw something about, there's a new industry being considered right now, the Fulcrum plant in Gary, which honestly could result in some really neat low carbon, low cost transportation fuels using household garbage to produce those biofuels. In theory, that's great. However, how can we be sure inviting another industry onto our lakeshore is a good idea when, again, that accountability, we just don't seem to be seeing that as something that is important. So can we trust our state to bring that in, to bring in an industry like that, to also inundate an area such as the city of Gary that already has so much industry? It's a lot of questions that we need to be asking, and we need the state to really take it seriously and step up and be a part of that conversation. Realize that this is something so much more than just bringing industry into compliance.
Thanks, Natalie. Mike, you probably saw a couple questions here about quality of life related to preventing brain drain, and also a follow-up question on housing. Any points to those?
I mean, much of the point of quality of life is that it's driving brain drain. When we know that workers are not moving to jobs are moving to workers, and that's been a growing trend now that's almost fully complete in the United States. And so the households choose places they wish to live. Businesses are trying to locate there to have access to that labor market and the consumables that are there for most jobs in the United States involve producing something that's consumed locally. We've never been a more local country than we are today, because 70% of what we spend in our households are services. And so quality of life is the driver of ending brain drain and why many places in Indiana are doing poorly. And then the second question is housing. Local governments have a lot of mechanisms available in their land use planning, in their incentives. We testified to move TIF as a tool for residential development that could do infills. Kokomo is a great place that's done it. There's lots of models and for this. It's just something that local communities have to value, and it's a lot cheaper to start it when those communities are turning than to wait till they're really no longer salvageable.
Okay, and you've mentioned Kokomo as an example of some good work. Can you point to, say, a rural area in Indiana that you think is on the right track?
Yeah. I mean, I think of Batesville and Jennings County, which is a rural county. I think Madison does a pretty good job with it, and it actually balances a lot of heavy industry with working on quality of life. I mean, the Jay County, Indiana, is a very rural place that has an awful lot of focus on quality of life. They've consolidated their school corporation schools in a way that makes them sustainable. It's a lot of, long distance to travel, but when you're a county of 25,000 people, that, some of preserving the overhead on a lot of local public services just not fiscally feasible. And so I think there's a lot to be said about what that county's attempting to do. And then there are other places that are doing a good job of playing catch up. Randolph County is really working hard to figure out what they do. I'm trying to think. Spencer County is a place that has focused a lot on quality of life, and they have their largest employer is a large power plant, and so there are plenty of examples of people working in this area, and it's almost a constant improvement model. And you think about when people are relocating, they care about what the future's like, not just where we are now. So a lot of households are moving to places that they think are going to be consistently improving and providing that quality of life over their life cycle, not just at a short period of time that you have kids in school, for example.
Okay. Well, we just have a couple minutes left, and I'm guessing you've all been looking at the comments and questions. Anybody have a last remarks or comments you'd like to talk about?
I'd like to mention, I see where Gary Davis asked a question about the air quality in the Ohio Valley. And actually, there's not a lot of monitors down in our part of the state, so being monitored correctly at like the American Lung Association, if you dig deeper, if on their research, it's no data available. So, and Gary was asking about the air quality, and we, with our monitor network back during the fires out west, we actually recorded where Evansville, which is only about 35 miles from Dale, was actually the worst city east of the Mississippi River that day for air quality, because I think we live in a low-lying area, and I don't think there's enough monitors to actually help us to see where we really are, but that's part of the issue.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, I just saw we added a 5-minute buffer.
Yeah, we've got a few extra minutes here. Natalie, if you want to go ahead and comment about the new commissioner selection.
Sure. So if there was some kind of call to action and something that I would like to just share with everyone, because it's not just specific to the Northwest corner, it's to our whole state. With Items Commissioner leaving, and he's leaving December 3rd, we have then this whole of, who is the governor going to appoint to be that leader, our state's champion, when it comes to environmental management? And it's going to be something where we collectively can raise our voice that we get the right person in there who is going to take managing our environment seriously, permitting those industries, working with the public, not just the industry themselves, but looking at things collectively. And if there was a call to action that I would say right now, no matter where you are, it's going to be writing the governor, calling him, letting him know that this is something of the utmost importance. We want that qualified individual, and we want it to not just be about bringing into compliance. We want it to be thinking about in terms of how does, how the environment interacts with people and the quality of life, the place that it makes. So I just want to re-emphasize that because I think it is huge for all of us that we're talking about that and overseeing and informing that next leader for our Department of Environmental Management.
Okay, thanks.
It's a great thing, Natalie. Great idea.
Yes, good advice. Well, we do have a few extra minutes. Mike, when we've spoken in the past, you've always been very gracious with advice and counsel and information. And for all of our friends and allies around the state that are, confronted with some project in their community that, they think will have an adverse effect on quality of life, and in most cases will. What advice do you have for people in incorporating those discussions and facts and figures and perspective in all the work that people are doing around Indiana?
I mean, I think that's a great question. We all get very siloed. I'm an economist, so I don't think about the social impacts of employment change, or I don't think about necessarily what it might do to, a competing firm. I'm really thinking about, the tax effect, the purely economic things that I study. And so for those of you who have interest in broad areas, and I'm sure, looking at the chat, there are people with broad perspective. I just think always asking for transparency. Tends to be, my experience has been the worst project are the ones you know the least about, that don't share information, and you can force those things just by first asking, showing interest. There are very few occasions where everybody on a city council or a county commission are fully aligned on a project. They disagree. And so, really attending meetings, have folks attend all your county commission meetings, county council meetings, city council meetings, so that you hear what's happening in the economic development space. Pushing to have an economic, represent the Chamber of Commerce, the environmental issue. There are businesses in each of your communities that are part of the Chamber of Commerce that depend on quality of life, quality of place, and a good environment for their success. So ask them to help represent you when the incentives are coming to the table, so that you can change people's mindset. And again, and there are many people, I'm sure, listening to this. When you talk about job growth or attracting jobs, you say, well, that's good, but we got to balance the environment. No, it's usually not the case. The extra employment growth often has a very small environmental footprint. It's only really communities that sort of give up their future and say, we're just going to take this big polluter here. I'll use the Muncie Wales example. That would have, for 80 jobs, we're going to incentivize a mercury emitter, less than a mile from campus in downtown Muncie, just would have bathed us in mercury. And that is not economic development. There's nothing about that would have been a net positive. And focusing on each of the aspects that were problematic, I think, will give you better outcomes. And this is almost always an issue that the grassroots work matters a lot better, because if your elected officials don't hear from you, they assume you don't care.
Okay. Well, thank you. And we're about out of time. So thank you to all of our panelists, Mike Hicks from Ball State University, Mary Hess from Dale, Indiana, and Southwestern Indiana Citizens for Quality of Life, and of course, Natalie Johnson, Executive Director of Save the Dunes Council. You've been a great panel. Really appreciate your spending time with us today. And for everybody watching, please stay tuned. There's a lot more to come today. So thanks again.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.